A lot has
Thanks, Yvonne.
changed, obviously, since the last Party Congress in 2017. Do you see in the U.S.'s eyes, is China now more of a threat than an opportunity?
Well, they just announced overnight, Yvonne, as you've mentioned, the national security strategy. And this has been long awaited. But on China, I looked through it this morning because it came out overnight my time. And I see a lot of consistency in what we've heard previously from the administration in dealing with China. Clearly, they see China as a challenge in a number of areas. And they want to deal with that by investing at home, building up the strength at home in terms of competitiveness. You saw the CHIPS Act and other efforts to try to gain strength at home. Basically, the idea is you got to get your house in order if you want to have an effective foreign policy. They're also aligning very closely with allies and partners around the world, acting with common purpose. And they want to compete with China. That's, they're very clear about that, but do it responsibly. And they talk about guardrails so that competition doesn't become too confrontational and bleed into conflict. Importantly, they, unlike the Trump administration, have not abandoned the effort to try to cooperate with China on key areas like global issues like climate change, non-proliferation, public health. So I think their strategy is consistent with what we've heard previously. Clearly, they see challenges from China, but I think they are trying to put together a framework that both allows U.S. and China to compete, but do it in a healthy way, and bound off those areas that are more dominantly zero-sum, which you mentioned, the semiconductors and 5G and other emerging technologies.
How much does this CHIPS Act really, I guess, freeze China in its development for their own chips? Because they still rely on a lot of, parts of the supply chain, whether it's advanced foundries from Korea and Taiwan. How big of a blow is this for China?
Well, my sense is it will be fairly significant. But, in order to understand why the U.S. has taken these steps, I think we sort of have to back up and kind of look at the origin of the frustrations in the U.S. and other countries around the world. Of course, the United States welcomed China's entry in the WTO. Several years later, maybe 4 or 5 years later, China announced its indigenous innovation strategies, which ultimately culminated in Made in China 2025, and clearly wanted to, expressed an interest to dominate the emerging technologies. And they actually stated, clearly goals around market share and revenue. And that put pressure on a lot of Chinese companies. Those Chinese companies had to go out and get intellectual property. And a lot of that was done through cyber theft and other illicit means, forced technology transfer. And I think that created a huge amount of frustration in the United States. And you're seeing now the United States, they tried to deal with those issues with Chinese, I think, did not feel they got where they wanted to get to. And now they're defending themselves. And this is really a sort of a defensive maneuver working with partners and allies around the world.
And this coming at a time when the domestic economy is not looking in good shape either, Paul. And I have to wonder, every party leader since Jiang Zemin had talked about economic development as being the top priority. Does that change in any way this time around? Because we have seen zero COVID strategies. We've seen Xi rein in big tech. How is Xi going to strike that balance between national security and development?
Well, I think you put your finger on it, not surprisingly, Yvonne. Coming out of this 20th Party Congress, if President Xi has 3 priorities at home, I think they ought to be the economy, and the economy. The situation with China's economy is really quite serious now. The pandemic-related restrictions, which you mentioned, the falling consumer spending, we've got declining business sentiment, capital outflows, and of course the struggling property sector. That's all inflicted damage on the Chinese economy. And China also faces, as you know, these long-term structural challenges, high debt loads, inequality. And these challenges make it difficult for the Chinese leadership to achieve this long-term goal to escape the middle income trap. That effort to escape the middle income trap is difficult on its own. With these other challenges, it makes it very, very difficult. This year will mark the first time in over 3 decades that most Asian economies will grow faster than China's. That's fairly significant. Historically, China's rapid growth was a key asset. As growth slows, that'll be a risk that China faces, not only internally, but in terms of its foreign policy as well. this will affect that as well. So keeping the economy growing, improving the livelihoods of Chinese citizens will be a major factor in, maintaining that credibility of the Chinese Communist Party
Yeah.
and stability in China.
Real quickly, Paul, then what will the next 5 years look like for President Xi once he does get that third term? In a way, do you think that, what can you gauge politically, whether he has amassed power or lost it in the past decade?
Well, I think that the Party Congress starting on Sunday will give us a window into, what power President Xi has amassed. As you know, the Party Congress next week simply announces decisions that have been made over the course of the year. The environment's very opaque. There's been very few indications or leaks about what's going to happen. But I think the thing to really look at is, how strong is President Xi's power? As you mentioned, this will be a precedented-breaking third term for President Xi. That demonstrates, in my view, he continues to dominate the political landscape. But there are questions about how powerful Xi is and whether his power has been diminished over the past year, given the challenges that he's faced.